This podcast is sponsored by Bigger Brains, online training that won't bore you to tears. Expand the minds of your workforce at getbiggerbrains.com.
Welcome to Permission to Speak, the video blog and podcast that loiters at the intersection of leaders who want their people to speak up, technology that facilitates connections, and results that serve our higher purpose. Now, here's your host, Kelly Vandever.
Hi, welcome to the podcast. This is Kelly Vandever, and my special guest today is Elaine Knight. Now, I met Elaine in a rather unusual way. We're both members of the Atlanta chapter of the Association for Talent Development. And I was looking through the directory, looking for somebody, and I happened to notice next to Elaine's name, she had written E3, Employees Engagement Empowered. And I thought, okay, maybe this is someone I need to meet. So I stalked her online and I saw in her LinkedIn profile that she described herself as a results catalyst, MBA, HR generalist, organization development person or professional rather, and a culture consultant. So I knew I was right. I needed to meet her. I must not have come off as too stalkerish because she did agree to meet me for lunch. And after our conversation at lunch, I invited her to be on the podcast. So welcome to the podcast, Elaine.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I'm so glad you stalked me online and we got to connect because we could have a wonderful lunch. And you introduced me to a great little cafe in my area. So thank you.
Oh, very welcome. My pleasure. My pleasure. Okay. So as you know, before we get into the content of the interview, we ask a couple of quirky questions, get to know a little more about you as a person. And so the first quirky question is, what is your favorite guilty pleasure television show?
Okay, so I would say that most TV shows that I watch are guilty pleasures because I don't watch a lot of TV. So I would honestly cancel Comcast if it wasn't for the internet. Get rid of it altogether. But I would say that one of the shows, and of course it's a reality show, it wouldn't be a guilty pleasure unless it was a reality show, right? But the one that I have been watching recently that I find to be really, really neat is Born This Way. And it actually chronicles young adults with Down syndrome and just kind of takes you through what it's like to live a day in their life and just some of the challenges that they face. And it's just such a heartwarming show. I mean, honestly, it's worth the time, I find, because it's just so beautiful to see how their caretakers just have so much patience with them and really how uniquely gifted and amazing these young people are. You know, our society says that people with special needs are just kind of, you know, to be set aside and they're not really worth anything. And it's so not true. I mean, these young people have such amazing talents and it's just really inspiring to me.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
So my next quirky question is, what is your favorite possession?
Okay, this one was definitely tough because I debated between two, but the one I finally came up with was my bike. Yes, I'm the proud owner of a Schwinn. It's really nothing fancy, honestly. My bike is probably like 5 or 6 years old. And it's not one of these bikes that I spent a lot of money on, but I just love my bike. I love getting out. I live actually near the Chattahoochee River, and so I go on the trails next to the river pretty much every day. I get out there on my bike, and I just love the feeling that my bike gives me. It's just a sense of freedom, gets my heart pumping, and I just love being outdoors in nature. So my bike is the vehicle that helps me to do that. So it's definitely my favorite possession.
Very cool. Very cool. I also have a bike and like to bike, but ever since we got the motorcycles, I can't get my husband back on the bicycle. So
once you upgrade to that level of speed, right?
Exactly. All right, cool. Well, then, the next question is kind of our transitional question, and that is, what is your story? What happened in your life that got you to a place where you cared about employees speaking up and having a voice?
Well, I think like most people that get really involved with particular causes, my passion being for employee engagement, I was that employee that felt rather voiceless. You know, when I came out of college with my newly minted degree, I felt like I was ready to change the world and make a big impact. And I just kind of found that with the larger corporations that I started working with, that I was really just more of a cog in a wheel, that all of the processes and the different things were already kind of set in place. And it was really more important for me just to kind of follow through with the status quo than it was to challenge any of the inequities in the system or any of the issues that I might see, the things that were really inefficient or the things that were actively disengaging employees. It was really just kind of like, look, we don't really want to change. We want to keep the status quo here. So why don't you just kind of pipe down? And that was really challenging for me because I think that, I've had many titles in my lifetime as far as career titles, but the one title that I really hold near and dear to myself is an entrepreneur. I really consider myself to be an entrepreneur, and entrepreneurs are agents for change. So if there's something that seems to be a little less than optimal, my gut instinct is to want to get in there and fix it. So that's kind of how I came to be interested in employee engagement.
Okay, well, maybe if you could share a little bit about your background and how you kind of got to where you are today. I think that would probably help our listeners know a little more about some of your perspectives when we talk about those.
Absolutely. So I went to Michigan State University, and that's kind of where it started. I was always interested in business. I'd had my own babysitting company, if you will, since I was like 10 years old. So I started early with an interest in business. But when I went to college, I was really most interested in helping others. So I decided to pursue a career in nursing. I didn't last long in the nursing program. I really think that the linchpin was honestly the cadaver lab that I attended, and
holy cow,
pretty much ran out screaming. I'm not going to lie. I was like, I don't think this is for me. So I headed straight to the business school, and I ended up doing really well and really enjoyed my studies, and wasn't really sure exactly what to, select as my major. There were a lot of subjects. Really everything about business is really interesting and fascinating to me, but I really wasn't sure what to pick at the time, and I think Michigan State University is still very top tier for supply chain management. I was kind of being coached at the time to take a look at that career field. So I went into supply chain management thinking, you know what, I'm not going to Harvard Law. Michigan State University is the #1 supply chain university in the world. Let me go ahead and capitalize on that and see kind of what they have going on. And I really enjoyed it. I really did. Very quantitative degree, so lots of, figuring out different problems and equations and kind of understanding Lean and Six Sigma and all those different methodologies. I had an internship with Target and really, really enjoyed my time there. It was my first summer away from home, and I remember just being on my own and having this job, and it was just so exciting. And I loved the culture at Target. I was working in their distribution center, and they had the culture of recognition. So we would start every single meeting with recognition. So I would say to my manager, hey, I think you did a really great job of making sure that XYZ took place. And it was just an excellent, positive culture. Their mission was to become the best company in the world. I mean, I really can't, how do you get much more aspirational than that? I'm not sure. But so I really enjoyed it. Then after a graduation, I turned down a full-time job offer with Target to go to Florida to work with JCPenney Logistics. And I chose that primarily because I'd grown up in Michigan and I was frozen through and through. And I was just young, and I was like, you know what? There's no difference between retailers. This is going to be the same deal. I'm going to get down to Florida. It's going to be all palm trees and sunshine, and it's going to be great. Well, much to my chagrin, that was my first lesson in the differences between company cultures. And again, as kind of I described earlier, the culture at JCPenney was 100-year-old company. They had gone through some really hard times, and most of their managerial staff were in a place where they planned to retire within the next several years. And so they were really just kind of stuck in, keep the status quo mode. They really didn't want to make any changes. And we certainly didn't have any recognition in meetings. It was really more of a command and control, top-down sort of leadership style that was really prohibitive for any feedback. So that was a little bit about kind of how I came into business. From there, I went to work with McMaster Car Supply Company. And there again, it was a very transactional type of culture where they paid you really, really well. And they had some amazing benefits, but at the same time, they really didn't want to engage with you as a human being. They kind of really wanted to treat you more like a robot. We give you this, you give us that. That's pretty much it. There I earned my MBA, and I really feel like that was a course in self-study. It was something where I felt like I already knew the basics of business, which I did. So, of course, I learned more about business and more in depth than I did in my undergraduate studies. But I took an assessment there called the CareerLeader Assessment. And I would recommend it to anyone. And I really, really believe that I wish I had taken this when I was in high school, because it would have given me a much better indication of kind of what I have an affinity for and what I excel at, because they test your answers against those who are successful in their field. So what my top two matches were entrepreneurship and organizational development. And so I went about learning more about those. I went to work for an entrepreneur, and I got a certificate in organizational development after earning my MBA. And I love OD because it really just talks about how to make changes more successful. 75% of all change initiatives in business fail. So it's no surprise to anyone that's been in business that there's always something new coming down the pike, and people often resist change because they're just waiting for it to pass over. They're just waiting for the storm cloud to move on so that they can go back to doing what they wanted to do. And OD really engages people and tries to get everyone's input in making the change so that it's sustainable long term. So
very cool, very cool. Now, you do some consulting work now, is that right?
That's correct. Yep. So it was interesting because when I got my internship when I was in my MBA, it was with a company called Access to Capital for Entrepreneurs. And they provide small business loans in coordination with the SBA. And the requirement for that is that you have to provide some type of training in order to qualify for those loans. So what I would do is actually head up these lunch and learns, and I would get a group of entrepreneurs together, most of which really hadn't had any college level experience. And we would talk about topics like cash flow, or we would talk about networking and the ways to kind of network your business in a really smart way instead of just kind of, guessing and going to different events that really wouldn't have key referral partners there for you or even prospect clients. From there, I went to work for a small company called CSR, which stands for Consulting Solutions Results. And I had a really positive experience there. I got to work one-on-one with small business owners, typically in the professional services realm. A lot of attorneys, real estate agents, some doctors, and really just helping them. A lot of times people that are really proficient in their craft, they know the law really well, they know real estate really well, they know their craft really well. They didn't necessarily have all the time in the world to learn business as well, but they're thrown into owning and operating their own businesses. So I would come in and help them develop a strategic plan and just really kind of map out what the priorities were quarter by quarter for their business for the next 3 to 5 years, and really just try and get our arms around what their personal goals were and how that integrated into their business. And kind of just, you want to plan with the end in mind, right? So if you want to sell your business in 5 years, then there are things that you need to be doing now to make sure that you're prepared for that. And I just love working with small business owners. I'm an entrepreneur myself and a small business owner myself. So I just really think that we're the heartbeat of the American economy. And it's really exciting and fulfilling to be able to help them to just be better at what they do.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, and actually one of your LinkedIn recommendations reads, she's very adept at helping management realize not only their responsibility to the bottom line, but the responsibility to the employees, vendors, and industry partners. So could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest, I love assessments. And one of my favorite assessments, because I really think to know thyself is one of the biggest keys for success for any professional. One of my favorite assessments is the Strengthsfinder Assessment. And my number one strength, and I've taken this a couple times, is strategy. So I'm a very strategic thinker. And I think one of the biggest things that I do to help add value to my clients is that when we sit down, we really look at the big picture. We look at their business in total, all of the different parts and how they affect one another, especially in the landscape in which they're operating, the industry. So when we look at things like vendor relationship, partnership, when we look at how your customers are reacting to your services, what type of feedback they're giving you, we're not making decisions in isolation. We're not treating the different aspects of your business as silos. We're actually integrating all those different pieces and making sure that we're thinking about all of those different pieces when we're making key strategic decisions. So I think that's what Kevin was talking about when he gave me that glowing recommendation, which I appreciate.
All right. Well, so thinking about some of the leadership roles that you held in your career, what are some of the lessons you learned early on as a leader that they didn't cover in your MBA program?
Oh my gosh, I wish that I had gotten these life lessons before I stepped foot on that warehouse distribution floor. Let me tell you, I say that it was a baptism by fire managerial experience, because you come out of school with a bunch of theory. You come out thinking you really know a lot about how business works. And then, those $8.50 an hour workers really take you through the school of hard knocks. And I think that one of the things, there are a couple lessons, really valuable lessons that I learned. I had a perception when I came out of undergrad that the boss was the person that was the most stressed out, the most tense, the most worried about, we have got to make sure that, all of these goals are being met and that we are looking really great to our boss. And it's all about this kind of external perception, right? And what I realized is that the leader really has to be one of the most calm voices of reason in the voice of this in the middle of the storm. Because when you're in a distribution warehouse setting, or really any management or leadership setting, you know as well as I do that the change is happening so rapidly, and there are curveballs being thrown at you left, right, and center. You don't know what's coming next. So I think that it would have been helpful for me to know that the leader really has to lead by example, which seems obvious, but the example needs to be that we're confident, we're calm, we can handle anything that comes our way. We're going to get through this together as a team. And really just work to engage the different workers by understanding what motivates them. I truly believed that people were motivated by purely their paycheck, and maybe the fear that I had the power to terminate them. Those were the two things that I thought, oh, those are the magic levers. They're going to be intimidated by me just because I'm their supervisor or their manager. I really shouldn't have to work too hard to get them to take it to the next level. They have the same intrinsic motivation that I do, to get ahead and to look good to your boss and to make sure you add these feathers to your cap and build your resume. And I just found that was not the case. That sadly, a lot of people in those positions, they're like, look, it's just not for me. They don't really want to, quote unquote, get ahead. For them, the job serves a purpose. It's just a job. You clock in, you clock out. There's really not a whole lot of thought that goes on in between. So getting to know them personally, getting to know their families, getting to know what really interests them and what really gets them excited, that's the thing that you need to understand in order to rally anybody to any type of cause that you want. Because the command and control, it's over with. That's a relic of the past. It's not something that works long term. So.
Absolutely, absolutely. In your so there was an article you wrote on LinkedIn about 3 tools every successful manager uses, and one of the things you talked about was strategic vulnerability. Can you tell us more about that?
So again, when I started with my management career path, I thought that again the manager had to be very tough and just sort of more aggressive and things of that nature to get results. And what I found, and I mentioned in the article, one of my favorite TED Talks is Brene Brown's The Power of Vulnerability. And, I think that everyone is kind of a product of their environment. And I grew up in a home where really vulnerability wasn't something that you wanted to really show other people. I mean, it was something more like, no, you don't lead with your weakness. You kind of hold that stuff back. You don't show your cards to the outside world. You don't want to be seen as weak or incompetent or any of those negative labels that get assessed to people that are authentic and vulnerable. So that was another lesson that I really had to learn with people, is that I had to be willing to share a little bit about myself, share a little bit about what my challenges were, what my struggles were, so that I could be more of a human being than just another supervisor or manager. So one of the stories that I always tell having to do with vulnerability is that there was a lady named Cheryl that worked for me. She really, I think, had sort of an issue with authority, and she was constantly making threats of litigation and lawsuits towards the company and towards management for their decisions. And it really got to the point where it was so contentious that none of the leaders of the organization were willing to interface with her one-on-one because they were so afraid of whatever, she was going to say afterwards or threaten afterwards. So I just made an effort to get to know her. I stopped by her workstation every day, and I tried to kind of get to know her personally a little bit more. I let my guard down a little bit. And what I came to find out was that she was dealing with some really, really tough stuff at home. I mean, just some really, really tough stuff at home that I could identify and relate to. And so I say strategic vulnerability because it's not something that you can come in on day one and just tell your new staff, hey, this is my whole story. These are all my deepest wounds. These are the things that you need to know about me, because that's really more seeking to be understood than to understand others. So I think that there's, you have to be a little bit pragmatic, but it is still something that is very powerful to use to connect with people, because at the end of the day, we're all human and we're all trying to get a job done. And if we can see eye to eye a little bit better, then it's just going to help grease the wheels and we're going to get a lot more accomplished.
So what happened with Cheryl when you were willing to share that you had some of the same struggles that she had?
It was like night and day, Kelly. I've never seen anything like it. She went from being so adversarial and so argumentative to literally being someone that would go out of her way to do whatever it was that I needed to make it happen. I mean, she would come in on overtime. She never would do that before. She would just, she took it up a notch. There were some miraculous results. So I was impressed.
Just because you were willing to be vulnerable, just because.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. Just a little bit of vulnerability does wonders.
Managers are human too.
Leaders are too.
Exactly. Oops, sorry, looking at my list here. So what are some of the other lessons that you might share with leaders that are listening here today that will help them as they try to engage and empower their employees?
Well, I think the best way to illustrate this lesson would be through a story. When my capstone project at JCPenney Logistics was, there had been a challenge that had been issued by the corporate home office. And basically what they realized is that all of these store support centers across the country, they were pure cost centers. We inbounded all of the material, all of the clothes and shoes and everything like that from China. We would separate them, make sure they had ink tags, proper pricing, and then we would send them out to the stores where they were to be sold. And our productivity was measured by the number of shipped units divided by the number of hours, employee labor hours, that it took to actually achieve those units. And basically, the home office realized that if across these 13 different store support centers across the country, if they could just if they could increase the productivity by just 1 point, they could save millions of dollars in operational costs. So they issued out a challenge to all 13 SSCs, and they said, if you can increase your productivity each quarter by 1, 2, or 3 points, we will award your facility with up to $50,000 cash prize, with which you can do whatever you would like. So we had about 400 people in the facility, and my boss, the store support manager, he had attempted to win the challenge for 3 consecutive quarters and had lost, hadn't even gotten 1 point above. And he was really in kind of a desperate situation. He was getting some heat from some of the other managers. He was certainly hearing it from home office. How come other sites have been able to accomplish this, but you haven't? What's going on? And from my personal perspective, I could see clearly at this point, because I'd been with the company for 4 years, that really the only tools we had to motivate anybody were negative reinforcement. It was corrective action. It was call you into the office and, essentially give you negative feedback. And that was supposed to encourage you, when really the people that were working there were honestly the working poor. I mean, they were dealing with issues that no one should really have to deal with, and they were on very, very tight budgets. So it was very difficult. They had a lot of challenges that they were presented with just on their own. And then the job was really tough. I mean, you're loading boxes onto a trailer in the middle of Atlanta in the 96-degree heat. Like, these were some very taxing jobs that people had. And so there wasn't a lot of motivation to try and do any better. Why would I want to? And my manager's style was, again, very authoritative. In meetings, he would openly mock and criticize people. I mean, wow. And that was just the style. That was the old school management style. And, I think it was kind of that good old boys club mentality of like, just a little ribbing and that'll get them going. And it didn't work on me. And it clearly wasn't working on anybody else. So my boss, I'll never forget, he slid this piece of paper across the desk and was like, and I picked it up and he was like, I want you to win the productivity challenge for the next quarter. And I just remember thinking, how in the heck am I going to do that? I have no idea how I'm going to do that. So I went to kind of my collaborative teamwork sort of mentality, and I picked influencers in each and every department. So someone from shipping, receiving, all the different areas. I called them into a room. We talked about it. And what we came up with was what we called the PIT crew, which was the Productivity Improvement Task Force. And we had a blast, Kelly. We got all kinds of fun costumes. We got Mardi Gras beads. We got feather boas. We got big hats. We made a prize wheel. We had a boom box, and we would go around to all of the different departments and surprise just one person at their workstation in front of all their peers who had increased their productivity the most from just 1 week to the next. So it was very short-term gains, celebrate this, make a big deal. They got to spin the prize wheel, which were nominal prizes of very, very small value, like a chicken biscuit in the cafeteria or a parking spot up front. These prizes were nothing really to sneeze at, but they meant something to the employees. So anyways, long story short, we ended up winning the productivity challenge for 6 consecutive quarters.
Wow.
And that just blew me away. And that was really what showed me that if you meet people where they are, you get their feedback, you incorporate that into your decision making, and you really understand what motivates them, all you have to do is just stand out of the way. People want to succeed. They want to do really well and make you proud. They want to do well for themselves, for their families, for their managers. You just have to give them the tools. You just have to give them the positive encouragement, and then just get out of the way, because they will take it to the house every time. So
What a great story that is.
I know. I love that story. It's one of my favorites. It really is.
It so illustrates everything that we've just been talking about in a really tangible way. Just very cool, very cool. So in a moment, I'm going to ask you if you have any other kind of closing thoughts or well, maybe I should ask this first. So how did that management experience, because that was so powerful, how did that color how you work with the folks that you consulted with? How did you take some of those lessons and help others with what you've learned?
Well, that really sparked my interest in employee engagement. So from there, I went on to study, have read several articles. Gallup is one of a big leader in gathering data and information. And of course, with my analytical background, data is of supreme importance. You have to have the data. It can't be made on just subjective opinions about things. So once I kind of gathered all of the data, and I basically saw that, for instance, there's another article that I wrote on LinkedIn, and the study that Gallup shared was that if you take two companies and they're pretty much the same exact company, but you have one company that has engaged employees and the other that does not, and their engagement is measured in a very scientific way. There's a certain level of ways to ask about what engagement is. The one company that has engaged employees actually has the ability to outperform the other company by 202%. I mean, to me, what I try to do is bring that to the small business owners, because a lot of times I'm trying to help people to grow. And one of the biggest issues they have is that they've got a revolving door. People are coming in, people are going out. People are coming in, people are going out. And it's impeding them from growing their business. You can't grow your business unless you've got the people to service your customers. I mean, a lot of times my clients come to me, they're in crisis because literally I've heard stories of, my wife is going to leave me if I don't stop working so many extra hours, right? So what I really help the small business owners to do is to understand, one, what are some of just the basic managerial skills that you need to have in order to be managing your human resources effectively, right? Just regular check-ins, things, making sure that the person knows exactly what's expected of them, help translate the company's strategy into actionable items that they understand and can actually do. And so that is pretty much how I translate employee engagement into what makes sense to a small business owner. It starts with the managerial skills. It moves into then having really good processes and procedures in place. And it also has a lot to do with their hiring process. It's okay to hire slowly. You want to do your due diligence up front. And the other thing is, you want to make sure that you don't ever make the mistake of thinking that an employee in the first 90 days of their employment is going to do anything other than take up your time and resources, because they're not going to come in and immediately fix problems. You have got to take the time to train them properly. They're really more of a project in the first 90 days, all the way up to a year, depending on how specialized the skill set is for your business. Mm-hmm. But people are an investment. People are an investment that the more you put into, you are going to get that return on investment triple. I mean, it's just going to be something that's just going to continue to come back to you the more you invest in your people. So I try to share that with my small business owners because it's counterintuitive. In today's business arena, it's a very adversarial relationship between managers, leaders, and their employees or, their direct reports. It's like, I need to get something out of you. You need to try and get as little work out for as most money as you can. And it's just opposing forces, and you're just going to continue to ping pong back and forth and miss the real issue, which is that if we collaborate and we work together and we infuse our culture with positivity and encouragement, then we're going to come up with such better results.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very good. Very good. Well, I'll give you a moment. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'll ask if there's anything else that you want to share with the audience. But that last question that I want to ask before I open it up is, so what have been one or two pleasant surprises along this leadership journey that you've taken?
Pleasant surprises, just with my employees or with results that I've been able to generate, or just any and everything.
Any and everything. Interviewee's choice.
Yes, yes. Pleasant surprises. Um, well, I think the story that I shared earlier with the productivity challenge was definitely one of the biggest wins that I've had in my managerial career. Um, Another pleasant surprise, I think, is just through management, I've really learned a lot about the human spirit. The human spirit, and also just how predictable, in a sense, human behavior is. And it's a pleasant surprise to me that I understand now how the relationship works. And that if you do invest and you do take the time to show the person that you care, and that you are trying to invest in them and actually help them to realize their full potential, their full career potential, then people are going to respond in kind. And I think that that is really beautiful, because there is that principle of reciprocity. And people know when you're trying to get over on them. And I certainly did that. You know, in the beginning, I thought, oh, I'm just going to try and milk these people for all they're worth and then move on. I mean, that was my mentality. I'm sad to admit it, because I've learned so much and grown so much that now I see just how ridiculous that, is. But I think a lot of managers become managers because they're really, really good at what they do.
Right.
And being really good at being an engineer, being really good at being an attorney doesn't necessarily translate to really good management or leadership qualities and capabilities. I think another pleasant surprise is that these things can be learned. That was something I really had a big fear about. I was like, oh, I'm kind of quiet. I'm more reserved. I'm not somebody that really has an affinity for speaking in front of large audiences or, rallying troops for a common cause. But it is something that can be learned and can be understood over time. And it's like anything else in life. You try some different things, you see what works, you see what doesn't, and then you just kind of continue to evolve. But as long as your heart's in the right place and you're really out there to help others and not just yourself, then you're gonna end up being really surprised at just how amazing people are. So.
Well said. Well said. Thank you so much. So I'm going to open it up. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the leaders that might be listening to help them as they continue on with their careers as well?
I think that the thing that I would say, I would encourage leaders to look at the research that Gallup has done on employee engagement and the Pew Research Center. There are several sources of data. If you want to double your profits and blow your competition out of the water, figure out how you can engage your workforce. And it's really not rocket science. It starts off with making sure that the people are well equipped to handle their day-to-day responsibilities, basically not setting people up to fail. It moves into creating that positive work environment where you're actually managing and leading the people, which means you've got to check in with them, see where they're at, see how you can meet them with where they are. My job as a manager, supervisor, leader is to remove the obstacles that my people have between them and success. That's my job. Yeah. It's not to tell them what to do, because really the reality is that they know their jobs the best. They do. They know the challenges, all the nuances that I can't possibly understand unless I actually sit there and do it, right? So my job is to remove those obstacles. And then it really just moves into listening to them. And once they have the skills and the communication necessary to be able to do the job, to do it proficiently, it comes back to incorporating and including them in on the change process. Because as we all know, change is going to be ongoing. We've got to keep changing in order to stay ahead of the competition and to stay relevant, really, in today's economy. So it's just so important to go to those frontline people and ask them, what do you see working? What don't you see working? Especially if those people are interfacing with your customer every day. I mean, the last story basically I'll tell is that when I was working with McMaster Car Supply Company, I was taking phone calls and dealing with customer concerns and helping them to fulfill their orders and making sure that their big projects were complete and they had the material they needed. And I will tell you, Kelly, they would complain about the electronic ordering system. I would say if I got 10 phone calls, 7 people would say something. And it was something that was really obvious to me. And I went to management about it again and again and again. And for whatever reason, they refused to change it. And it's just stuff like that it's like, look, if you're getting that feedback from your customer, you need to take action on it. And if your employees are bringing it to you, it matters to them. So please listen and engage with them, and they'll engage with you and give you a really great return on your time.
Absolutely. 100% agree.
Yeah.
Well, Elaine, thank you so much for being willing to take some time and to share your story so that we can learn from you as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kelly. This was a pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I appreciate
This
it.
podcast was brought to you by Bigger Brains, online training that won't bore you to tears. Expand the minds of your workforce at getbiggerbrains.com. Thanks for tuning in to Permission to Speak. If you want to increase collaboration and innovation in your organization, check out more resources available at speakingpractically.com. Or give me a call, Kelly Vandever, at 770-597-1108.